Okay, let's begin. Kumlen and a black Gemara. We are up to Kesuvos Daf Pei Gimel Amud Aleph. It's Mitzvah Rosh Hashanah. And we should have a good year. Okay, so we're continuing to discussing the Kesuvah, and a person, a husband, has basically three different connections to the Kesuvah regarding his benefit. Number one is if it's nichse meloig, these are the plucked assets that she brings into the state, he gets all the dividends. It's her property. At the end of the day, it's her property, but he toils with it and he gets the dividends. That's the payers. Number one. Number two.
I know that, but I think Sophia's giving a yogurt anyway.
Number two is.
I think everybody should use themselves.
Yeah. Okay. Number two is if she predeceases him, then all of her assets transfers to him. So he yashins her. So that's number two. Number three is while they're married, if she attempts to sell the property, he can prevent her from selling the property because he's losing out on the dividends. These are the three connections that he has. And we are going to talk about now about a person who says, and he says to her that I don't want to have any benefits, without specifying which particular benefit he's talking about. And the general rule is if you don't specify, we always tend to go to the one that he loses the least amount. So the question is, from these three, which is considered the least, the smallest loss for him? Losing on the dividends, which is purely extraneous to the property, or not being able to inherit the property, but that's because that only happens if she dies before. If he died before her, he's not going to inherit anyway, or preventing her from selling the property. So let's do the Mishnah. If somebody writes to his wife, Din udvarim ainli, I don't want to have anything to deal with you, in your assets. Talking about the nichse meloig that she brought into the marriage. We just started the Pei Gimel Amud Aleph, the Mishnah. So here, a husband tells his wife, I don't have any benefit from you. So which of these three things did he cut himself out from? Number one is, as far as the dividends are concerned, they're still existing. He did not deny himself the dividend. And if she dies, predeceases him, he will inherit her. So what did he deny himself by saying, I don't want to have anything to do with you? With three lines on the top of the page, Pei Gimel Amud Aleph. So what did it mean when he said, I don't have anything to do with you, with your assets? It means imachra, v'nasna kayim. It means the only thing that he sort of removed himself from is the right to prevent her from selling the property. If she sells the property or gives it away to someone, that sale is a valid sale because he stepped back from it. From the three things, this is what he stepped back to. That's the smallest loss. Why is that the smallest loss? We'll see in the Gemara later, because generally women did not want to sell the property that they brought into the marriage from their family because they feel it's some kind of a stigma or there's something very sentimental about this property because it came from her family. She really doesn't want to sell it, very reticent to sell it. So it's probably not going to happen. That's why this is considered the smallest loss, even though practically it's not the smallest loss, because as soon as she sells it, he loses out on the dividends as well. Not only that he can inherit in the future. What happens if Kesuvos, he added something. He said, Kesuvos, Dinu dvarim ainli bin chosayich. I don't have anything to do with your assets. But he adds, Ube peireisem. I also don't want your dividends. So he clearly spells out, he enunciates, I don't want your dividends. Plus he said, I don't have anything to do with your assets, which you said before means I'm stepping back. I cannot prevent you from selling it. So in this case, that he will not eat the dividends anymore because he clearly spelled it out. But what he still retains is the right to the inheritance. If she passes away first, he inherits her because then he did not cancel. Rabbi Yehuda says, even though he said, I will not eat from the dividends, and Tanakama holds it for no dividends you can take for part of. Rabbi Yehuda says it's only limited directly to the dividends, not to the dividends of the dividends, which you already had a few times in Gemara before. We'll have the Gemara soon, and that is, what's a dividend of a dividend? If you take the dividend and you buy new property, the property again belongs to the wife, and the fruits that grow from that is the dividend, but that's called a dividend of a dividend.
If he's buying a new property with the dividend,
Why does the wife have a say?
Because the dividends are there to be. We had a few days ago. Rovach Beisa. The dividends are there to be spent on the family, on the house, and everything else. And we'll see. Ad Yichtavla. Rabbi Yehuda says, when does he lose out on the dividend? We'll see in the Gemara later. With the dividend of the dividends, when he said, if he writes Dinu Dvarim Ein Lebin Chasayich Ube Perisein and the dividends Ube Pei Perisein, so he clearly spells out and the dividend of the dividends, and then he adds the words Ad Olam, forevermore. The Gemara will have a discussion soon. Do we need all of these words, Pei Perisein and Ad Olam, both clauses or not? Next case, what happens, Kosala, but if he adds Dinu Dvarim Ein Lebin Chasayich, I don't have anything to do with your assets, Ube Perisein, the dividends. So far he already cut out two things. He will not prevent it from selling it. He will not get a dividend. Ube pay the same, so he won't even get the dividend of the dividends according to Rabbi Yehuda. And then he adds bechayach while you're alive, ube meisach, and after you're dead, I don't have anything to do with your property. Which means the only benefit he has from the property after she died is that he inherits it, but he just stepped back from that as well. Then he will not eat any dividend while she's alive. And if she dies, he does not inherit because he spelled it all out. However, Rav Shimon ben Gamliel disagrees. He says he can never cut himself out from the inheritance. Why is that? Rav Shimon ben Gamliel says, Im Mesa, if she dies, Yeshana, he still inherits her. Why? Then you want to opt out from that? Because what he did now was he sort of tried to contract out from the law of the Torah. Rav Shimon Gamliel is of the opinion that Yerushas Habal is Mahatayra. This, that a husband inherits their wife, we learn out from an extra pasuk v'yarash oisa that he interprets she'eray means because it's extra. His wife, the Mahatayra, you inherit your wife, so therefore you cannot contract out of it. And if you try to contract out of something the Torah gives you, the tie is bottled. We already had a machlekes before, Rabbi Yehuda and Rav Meir. When it comes to matters of money, if you can contract out of it, make it tonight. We had it regarding she'er ksus v'oina, that you committed to provide food for your wife or your clothing, and if you make a conditional that you're getting married on condition, I don't have to give it to you. So it's a masna masha kosa b'Torah. When it comes to money matters, Rav Meir says tonight bottled, but Rabbi Yehuda says tonight kayim. She can be meichel. Rav Shimon Gamliel obviously holds that the Tanai is bottled, so therefore, just because he said, I don't want to inherit it, he always has a right to inherit it. Okay, says the Gemara, he'll learn, it says the Braisa, our Mishnah says he has to write it down. He wrote it down, like I wrote a contract to opt out of these benefits. However, the Braisa said, he just said it to his wife, and that's sufficient. Okay, so the Gemara just makes a note that the Braisa says he said it, not that there's an argument. It's just saying that even though our Mishnah says that he wrote it, it doesn't necessarily have to be that he wrote it. That just saying it is good enough. And we'll explain. Okay, now the Gemara has a question. Who cares saying, writing? We don't understand how this can be effective. So you wrote, you want to opt out. So what? When you want to transfer ownership, there has to be something tangible. There has to be something transferring, changing hands. Here, there's nothing here. There's nothing tangible. You're just saying, I don't want this to happen. But on what is that kinyan chal? There's nothing here for it to coincide or to be with. The item you're talking about is non-existent. It doesn't exist here yet. It's not here. So she didn't sell the property yet. She didn't die yet. She didn't give you dividends. There's nothing there yet. So what do you? So on what is the kinyan chal? Says the Gemara. So what if he writes this down? But Tanya, I mean, he should always be able to change his mind. Didn't we learn? If let's say two partners and one of them says to his friend, I don't have anything to do with you in this field. One partner said to the other one, I said, I'm walking away. I don't have anything, or he said these words. The only asik bar, I don't have any involvement in it. Or he says, I'm removing my hands, my ownership from it. It's meaningless. What happened here? Nothing happened. It's just words, it's verbiage. Nothing really happened. When you make a kinyan, it has to be something tangible. Something has to transfer, something to change. He just say, I'm walking away. What does that even mean? When you make something hefker, we'll have more in the Durham, that we actually understand it to mean you're giving it away to the whole world. Over here, you just say, my hand is no longer involved. So you said it. And therefore what? There's no kinyan, there's no transference. So in our Mishnah, why is it effective? So we're going to explain that our Mishnah is different. And why is our Mishnah different? Because we're talking about a unique case. We're not talking about a case where you're already married, because once you're married, you already have these rights and all of these properties, and you can't just say, I'm walking away. You have to give the right back to your wife. You have to say, I'm taking this right and I'm going to transfer it back to you, or something like that. You can't just say, I'm walking away. I don't want to be involved. So what are we talking about a case here where they're merely engaged? So he does not have yet those rights, but he will have them soon. So Amir Rabbi Yana said, the Kesuvos, he wrote it, but Oidarusa is still engaged. And this follows Rav Kahana. What did Rav Kahana say? Rav Kahana, if let's say this is not something that's inherently yours, it's about to come to you from somewhere, an outside source. So you have the right to say, I don't want it. You're right. Normally, if I own something already, in order for me to be no longer attached to it, I have to take it out of my reshus. But over here, it never came into my reshus yet. It never came into my domain. It's about to come in. So I can put like a wall there, a barrier. I don't want it to come in. And that's much easier to do because I'm not giving anything away. I'm just not accepting it. And how do we know that it works? So we add another line to it. And like Rava, because Rava said over here, that everything that we did over here between husband and wife, we did it to benefit the other person. Whatever we did, the husband gives food to the wife for her benefit. Therefore, she has the right to say, I don't want it. I'm not going to. You don't keep my earnings, and I don't need your provisions. In other words, whenever something is for your benefit, you can say, I don't want it. You want to benefit me, but I personally don't feel that this is a benefit for me. I'm not interested. And so, therefore, and the same thing here. The fact that we're giving dividends to the husband is to benefit the husband. The fact that he inherits is to benefit him. And the fact that he should prevent it from selling it so he doesn't lose out on a dividend is to benefit him. So he has the right to say, I don't want it. So it's not that he already has a right in it and therefore he's trying to forego that. Then you have to actually transact it properly, legally. Here, you want to give me a benefit that I'm not interested in. So therefore, he says, I'm putting a barrier here. Don't bring it into me in the first place. And for that, even just these mere words, I don't want it, my hand is removed, is good enough. The Rabbi said, the person says, I don't want, I know the Chacham are trying to benefit me, but I'm not interested. You're going through, like in this example, Shaymin labor, listen, Mike, you're going through, what do you mean like this example? Huna said, name Rav, every wife has a right to tell her husband, you take my earnings and you're going to take care of me. I earn more than you. I don't need you to take care of me. And therefore my earnings do not go to you, and I don't need you to provide for me. She has every right to say that because we did it in order to benefit her, but I don't want that benefit. So the same thing over here. The Al Mishnah is talking about they're just merely engaged. It doesn't have yet any ownership whatsoever. It doesn't really own the rights yet, and therefore you can just say, "Don't bring it to me." Says
Doesn't the Torah obligate the husband to provide for her?
We had a machlek is what she'era means. We had a machlek. She'era means intimacy, or she'era means food. Excuse me, clothing. And
so what's oina?
We had a machlek what oina means as well. We had yavamas. We have different opinions what these things mean. But even if the Torah says that he has to provide, she can always be meichel. Here we went further. We said that all of her earnings go to her husband. That's what the Chacham added. The Chacham added your earnings go to your husband, and therefore your husband will have an incentive to provide for you, take good care of you. But she has every right to say.
So what you mentioned earlier about the fact that you can't contract out of what the Torah instructs. So that was a question. It wasn't a conclusion. It wasn't a conclusion.
Right. When it comes to money matters, you halacha tanai kayim, you could contract out of it if the other party agrees. You can. It's like they're moichelet. Okay, I don't need it. But our question is that it's insufficient just to say, I don't want it. If I own something, I have to give it away. I can't just say, I don't want it anymore. It's still yours. Just because I said I want it doesn't make it no longer yours. So what happened over here? So we're explaining, we didn't reach the stage yet that it became yours. You're only a chassan, you're only engaged. And therefore, all you have is that one day it'll become yours. So you can say, before it becomes mine, don't want it. Says the Gemara, if the whole word is, so right now the Gemara thinks that the whole point is that because it benefits the husband, therefore he say, I don't want this benefit. Even if they're married, why can't he say, I don't want this benefit? Because you're sort of going a step further. You're saying that the whole thing of the Chum is purely a benefit, and you have every right to say, I don't want this benefit. So why can't he say it even after they got married? Says the Gemara.
But he can't say that because with that benefit comes an obligation. So he's basically saying, I don't want an obligation either.
He's saying, no, he didn't say that at all. He's saying right now, I don't want to have the right to stop you from selling the property. I don't want the dividends. I don't want dividend. And then tomorrow he changed his mind, right? What's the story here? There's no problem. If nobody changes their mind and he doesn't want the dividends, big deal. But what happened was he said, I want the dividends. And a month later, he changed his mind. And the wife said, nah, too late. You already told me you don't want the dividends. So I'm taking it for myself or giving it away to somebody else. So the question is, can the husband change his mind? Or did he actually did it ever take effect in the first place? And we're saying that it did take effect in the first place because since it's a benefit to the husband, so therefore you can change it. So our question is, if the whole point now you're saying is a little bit different than before because it's a benefit and every person has the right to say, I'm meichel the benefit. So even if he's married, he just says, I don't want this benefit. So my answer is, Omar Bai says, Nasuya yoda ki yoda. No, the problem is that once they're married, it's not just a benefit. He now has a partnership with his wife. And we just said before, once you have ownership of something, to give that up, to unravel that ownership, you have to do something. Just like to receive something, you have to make a kinyan. To give it up, you also have to make some kind of a kinyan to transact it. In fact, there's a whole debate when there's a buyer and a seller. Who's the main, who's the main party to the transference? Is it the seller giving it to the buyer, or is it the buyer taking it from the seller? Because the truth of the matter is they're both involved in the transferal of goods, because you need to make a kinyan to take it out of yourself, just like a kinyan to take it in. So once they're married, they're partners, and it's not good enough just to say, I want to walk away. So Abai used the expression that a husband and wife are like equal partners. Rava says, I believe Yoda Yadifim Yoda. In fact, he is, as long as he has a dividend and everything else, he is I guess, a stronger partner than she is. Now, what's the difference in our Gemara? It makes absolutely no difference whether they're equal partners or stronger. Even if he's only a 5% partner, as long as you have some ownership, you have to do something to get rid of it. What the relevance is, as the Gemara, this is the Gemara we had in Yavamis about a woman who shemeres yavam, and then she received some properties about a machlek, and then she died. Machlek is Beisham Beisil. We actually had in the Mishnah a few days ago as well, but Yavam is more about who gets the ksuva. Is it his family or her family? And Beishamai says that you split it equally, and Beisil says you give it to whoever was the owner till now. And according to Baya, we're talking about that that it happened while her husband was alive, and while her first husband was alive, and she then received this Yerusha. And since he and her are equal partners, and then he died, and then she died, so that's why you have to split it between his family, because he's a 50% partner, and her family. But Rava says they're not 50-50 partners. Rava says that the husband is the main person. So if she inherited while her first husband was alive, then his family would yashin the ksuba. And the Mishnah is talking about a case where she yashin it after the husband already died. But that's not totally unrelated to our Gemara. Gemara has a question. Konui miyodoi mahu. What happens if after he said these words, he then went ahead and he said, he made a kinyan to support these words. What happens then? What happens when he support these words? So in other words, he was married and he says that I want to walk away. We said before that it's merely words. So not, we're talking about the case here. We're talking about two partners, and we said before that partners, I can't just dissolve the partnership and say I'm walking away. Right? You have to transact, or do some kind of kinyan. So what happens? He says, I have nothing to do with you anymore, and you feel whatever it is. And then he makes a kinyan chalipin to enforce his words. How do we understand the kinyan chalipin? Is the kinyan chalipin merely to enforce his words? Then it's meaningless because the words don't mean anything. Or is the kinyan chalipin now usurping the words and saying, instead of the fact I'm just walking away, what I'm doing is I'm making kinyan chalipin to swap my portion and giving it over to you, and therefore it is valid. So how do we understand the intent? So the legal intent. You boy look on me the mouth in the basis says an argument. All he's doing is reinforcing the fact that he's saying I'm walking away, and he's like saying I don't want to change my mind. I'm making a kinyan. So what? But you can't just walk away. But Rav Nachman says megufisha karka konu miyadu. Rav Nachman said no. If you're making a kalipa, what you're really doing is you're giving her a part of the property. You're swapping the property to her, and therefore to your partner. So therefore it works. I think Rabbi Yosef is right in certain conditions. On what? That we say all you're doing is enforcing your words when immediately afterwards, for example, okay, there are two partners and Reuben and Shimon says to Reuben, okay, Dean is one mainly, I'm walking away. So right away, the partner, Reuben or Shimon, jumps into the property. And the other guy, the one who said, I'm walking away, said, hey, what are you doing? What are you doing? I didn't really mean it, and so on. So in that case, Rabbi Yosef is right. He never actually, nothing really happened yet. But if let's say 2 or 3 days later, he comes to complain, hey, I didn't really mean it, then Rav Nachman is right. Then obviously, when he made the kinyan, he meant to give over the karka with the kinyan chalipin, and now he changed his mind. Too late. The halachi that he's actually giving up the property, swapping the property itself. But you still didn't delineate exactly what you're trying to say. Is it ba'oider or ba'oimid? Are you agreeing with what Abaye said that it is only that it only applies to oimid? 2 or 3 days later, he comes along and said, "Hey, what are you doing?" Then we knew that initially he actually meant to give over the property. That's why he didn't complain. Or even in the case of oider, even if he complained 2 minutes later. Once they made the kinyan, the idea of the kinyan was to transfer the property, and he can no longer change his mind. Says the Gemara, mine have to be like Rabbi Yosef. I want to know if Rabbi Yosef is right or not. Amalei said, "Loi shmili." I didn't hear what he said. Claiming not that I didn't hear, but Loi shmili, I don't agree with his svara. Then the Mishnah continues. Im kein lamakos. He telling me that if he writes the deed to his wife or to his fiance, the deed of dvorim ainli or his betrothed, ainli ben chasayich. We said if he says that, then he still continues eating the dividends. He still inherits. So the Mishnah asks, so what's the point of saying you're walking away? What do you? And then the Mishnah answers, you're walking away that you can prevent it from selling it. Says the Gemara, let's understand the logic behind it. Says the Gemara, so ask the Gemara a question. First of all, why are we only honing in onto one? Remember we said there are 3 different benefits he gets from her property. Why did you decide he only forfeits one of those benefits? Maybe he forfeits all 3. I mean, the wording is, I have nothing to do with it. So the Gemara, he's walking away from all 3 rights. Abaye said the rule is Yad Balashtar al Tachtoina. We have a rule that if you have a contract and it's very, very vague, then we always go for the minimalist understanding. And therefore, when we say that the person is foregoing something, probably it's the minimalist. And the question is, which of these 3 is considered the smallest loss for this guy? So the Gemara said, let's go through them. Says the Gemara, what are the 3? One is dividends, payers. One is that he yarshes her, and one is that he prevents her from selling. So the Gemara, so you decided that the smallest loss for him is preventing that he loses the right to prevent her from selling it. So the Gemara said, the aim of the payment, maybe that the smallest loss is that he loses the dividends. Maybe that's what it is. And why is that? Because even if he doesn't get the dividends, the property is still hers, which eventually might become his. But the dividends is not really part of the property. Abaye said, nah. But on the other hand, if you're going to let her sell it, then you lose everything. No property, no dividends, nothing. He's not a much greater loss. So Abaye says, you know why preventing her from selling is considered the smallest loss? I'll tell you why he says. Butzina, a famous saying, Butzina tov mekora. Rashi says Butzina means a small pumpkin is better than a large pumpkin. A bird in your hand is better than 2 in the bush. If you have a small pumpkin right now, or if you can wait and leave it here for another few weeks, it'll grow large, it'll get bigger. It's better you to take it now. At least you have it. Because who knows who said it'll ever get better? Maybe it'll be a storm and you'll lose it altogether. So it's better to have something small, a bird in your hand, than 2 in the bush. So therefore, the same thing here. If the dividend is something that you're getting right now, even though it's not the property. She might sell it. Maybe she won't sell it. Who knows if she'll sell it? In fact, people don't even like selling it so much. So therefore, the loss of selling it is a much smaller loss than the dividend, because dividends is happening right now. It's a steady income, a steady revenue that's coming in, even though it's a small amount, but it's steady. It's happening right now. Losing that would be considered a greater loss than losing the right to prevent her from selling it. Okay, so that's the whole point that he's saying there. That butzina tov mekara. Tesis doesn't like what Rashi says. Only the principle is the same, but he says to say a small pumpkin versus a bigger pumpkin. Nah, he learned that butzina means a squash, and mikara is a pumpkin, and the squash is better, even though it's smaller, but it takes a lot less time to cook, so you can eat it straight away. Versus a pumpkin takes a lot longer to cook or a lot longer to grow. Okay, back to the Gemara. Okay, so we explain why selling is considered a lesser risk or lesser entitlement than the dividends. What about, it says, that's another question. The aim of Yerusha. Why don't we say that he walked away from the inheritance? Remember, the inheritance is only applicable if she predeceases him. If he predeceases her, there is no less, there's no benefit at all. So therefore, this is really the smallest loss, because it could be he'll never turn into anything. But on the other hand, maybe selling, he didn't walk away from it, because she can sell it and lose everything. And not only does he lose the property, he loses the dividends as well. So that's considered a bigger loss. Why don't, if we only have to choose the smallest loss, wouldn't the smallest loss be that he does not inherit her? Says the Gemara, interesting thing. Omar Abaye says, Misa shchicha, mechira lo shchicha. Between the two, you know which is more common? Death. That she predeceases him is more common than that she is going to sell it. And Rashi explains that selling, they were very reticent in selling, because I told you they was very sentimental about the property that they brought in from their family, and they didn't even want to sell it. But why is Misa Moshkiach? So Tosfos says that women used to die generally before men. Today we know that women on average outlive a man, but in those days men outlive women, and Tosfos says could very well be because many women died giving birth, childbirth, and therefore statistically the average lifespan of a woman was less than a man. So therefore, Yerusha was more probable than her selling the property. So the smallest loss or realistic loss would be for her selling it. So therefore, that's what we say. That's what he meant. Says he about it further.
What page are we on? I've just lost the place.
Somebody, please.
83B1. It's the second column near the bottom.
Yeah.
So, and the Gemara finishes off, when a person wants, it says, I want to walk away from one of the rights. Maybe he wants to make her feel good. He'd rather choose something which is rare, rather than something which is common. And a person does not really want to give up that right. So therefore, he doesn't want to give up the inheritance, but he's happy to give up to prevent her from selling. She probably won't sell it anyway. But this way, he sort of appeases her and makes her feel that he's very concerned about her or considerate. Rav Ashi says, I'll give you another answer. Rav Ashi says the reason is, just look at the language. You want to know why we decided that he wants to walk away from the right to prevent her from selling? Just look at the language. He used the word binachasayich, your assets. So the so obviously talking about the dividend. Dividend is not an asset. Dividend is a dividend from the asset. So that's number one. And number two, binachasayich, your assets while you're still around, which is while she's alive. And the only thing there that's applicable is that she has the right to sell it, and he can prevent her from doing that. So therefore, that's what he's walking away from. Says the Gemara further. Yehuda says he eats peiros. Now what? That he can continue eating the dividends of the dividends. It's not about an alien peiros. What's the difference in dividends and dividends of dividends? She brought in a property, but us the peiros, and he gave him dividends. And then that's called dividends. Mocha peiros, if he sold these fruits, and he purchased land with it, but us the peiros, it made new dividends. Payday. That's a dividend of a dividend. We have an interesting question. According to Rabbi Yehuda, the Mishnah's expression is if he wrote in this contract, I'm walking away from payday ad olam. So he has two phrases there, payday and ad olam, which means forever. So we want to understand the three possibilities in understanding this. Our question is as follows. Rabbi Yehuda, payday dafke, when it says in the Mishnah, he has to write payday if he wants to include the second generation. Or maybe the main item here is he just has to write ad olam forever. That automatically includes second generation and so on. And we don't. It doesn't have to insert those words payday paydas. And but if he just wrote payday paydas, it's not good enough. Or third option is dilma tavayu dafke. You need both payday paydas and ad olam. Now the Gemara is going to work through each one of these possibilities. Tim, to ask a question. You think you're asking me there's an option that maybe just write payday paydas dafke. So ask you a question, why the Mishnah adds the word ad olam? So ad olam lamali, what add if all you need is to say payday paydas, and automatically it means that all the future generations of the dividends are also forbidden, then why does the Mishnah add the word ad olam? Commercial, the Mishnah wants to teach you kivan the cost of payday paydas. The Mishnah is just telling you, the Mishnah is not saying that you have to write ad olam. The Mishnah is explaining that payday paydas is command the cost of ad olam. It's as if you wrote forever. You don't have to write it. That's what payday paydas means. It means the second generation, the third generation, fourth generation, and so on. Not that you're writing both clauses. Okay, now we're analyzing the next option. The next option you said was maybe ad olam dafka. The main phrase you have to put is the word ad olam. So payday paydas. Why in the world does the Mishnah add the word payday paydas? It's unnecessary. Again, how come Mashmalon? The Mishnah is trying to tell you that afagav the cost like payday paydas. Even if you wrote payday paydas, that's not good enough. Cost ad olam in. If you wrote ad olam good, and if you didn't. No, it only goes maybe to the second generation, but that's it. It won't go to the third generation of dividends or the fourth generation. It doesn't continue. Okay, third option. So the third option you said possibly was tavayu, dafka. Why in the world would you need both? Perhaps you need both. If you only wrote payday paydas and not add the word adol, having never thought payday paydas that only second generation is forbidden. Avol payday, but the third generation of dividends may be permitted. Forevermore. So just say ad olam, well, the cost of payday paydas, and don't put the word payday paydas. Having never thought that the first dividends are forbidden forever, every single year for the rest of our marriage. That's what it means. That's how Rashi learns. Therefore, you need payday paydas to tell you no, it means second and third generation and so on. The bottom line is the Gemara remains with a question whether you have to put them all in or not. So obviously, you put them all in to be able to all the different options. Next question we're asked, again, we won't have a resolution. Another question is, what happens, cost of law? He wrote to her, Dinu Dvorim, Ainli ben Chosayich. He said, I don't have anything to do with your assets, payday paydas. And he jumped straight away to the second generation of dividends. He omitted the first generation. He didn't say paydays are forbidden. He just said payday paydas. And the dividends are forbidden. I'm walking away from. So how do we understand regarding the initial dividends, the paydas? What happens there? Does he still retain ownership of that, or is he also foregoing that? Ma'u sheyochel paydas. Does he also eat? Does he still continue eating the dividends? Do we say the paydas on nafshe? He only walked away from the second generation on the paydas on nafshe, but not from the first generation. Or he walked away from both. Says Gemara, I would think that for sure he walked away from all of them. Why? Because if you're going to say he only walked away from the second generation, but not the first generation, in other words, he continues taking the dividends and he spends it and he uses it all up. Well, if he's allowed to use the dividends and he spends it all, then there's no money left over to have dividends of the dividends. So why does he have to bother making a star that I will not have any benefits from the dividends of the dividends when they'll never happen? Because you're going to use up all the dividends. You're permitted to use the dividends. Since you're going to eat up all the dividends, where are you going to get dividends of dividends? So why bother writing it in the star? Says Gemara, that's your problem. So let me ask you another question based on what you're saying. Well, the time according to you, now we learned in our Mishnah right here. The Buddha says he could continue eating the dividends of the dividends until he spells it out. Now the question is like this: if he, let's say, goes ahead and if he eats up all the dividends of the dividends, is paid as mehecha. Where is he going to get dividends from? If he's going to have, if there's not going to be any dividends of the dividends, where is he going to get paydas from at all to make the next thing of paydas? Obviously, there's some left over. In other words, just because you have paydas doesn't mean you have to use them all up. Paydas are there; you don't have to use them all up, and therefore, and what do you call it? And therefore, he could take the leftover of the paydas and buy a property, and then you generate more dividends, and that's called the dividend of the dividends. And therefore, it's possible that even though you're allowed to eat the dividends, you still might have leftovers to make dividends of dividends. And therefore, our question goes back. If you're allowed to eat, if you only said you're walking away, you're foregoing the dividends of the dividends, how do we treat the dividends themselves? Does it mean that you're no longer, that you're walking away from that as well? You just didn't bother spelling it out? Or no, the dividends you can have, and it's still possible to have dividends of dividends because you'll have some left over and you buy new properties and those dividends as well. And the question is what it means. And we remain with a suffix as well. Then comes along Shimon Gamliel. Rav Shimon ben Gamliel said, Amar Rav, says Rav, Rav Shimon ben Gamliel said that if you opted out of the Yerusha, you can't because Mahatayra, husband Yashin, his wife, and you're a masna al mashikosa b'tayra. Amar Rav says Rav said the following words, and we're going to try to understand what he meant, his implications. Rav said, Halacha ki Rav Shimon ben Gamliel. Rav said the halacha is exactly like Rav Shimon ben Gamliel, which sounds like that the husband, even if he said, I don't want to inherit her, still inherits her. But not for the reason Rav Shimon ben Gamliel said. What was the reason Shimon ben Gamliel said? He said because it's Mahatayra that he yashes his wife, and you cannot contract out of the Torah. That's what Rav Shimon said. So we are going to try to understand what Rav meant with these words. That he said the halacha is like him, but not for his reason. So what do you mean by the halacha is like him, and what do you mean not for his reason? So what other reasons can there be? What do you mean? So when you try a few attempts at this. First, what do you mean halacha Rav Shimon Gamliel b'leimet taimei? The halacha like Rav Shimon Gamliel, but not for his reason. What do you mean by that? Ilema, did you mean that the halacha is like Rav Shimon Gamliel? The Amar says, Mesa, if she dies, Yeshena, he still yashes her. So that part is correct. In other words, the halacha Rav Shimon Gamliel, that the husband will yashin his wife, even if he clearly says, I am walking away, I'm foregoing that. But the lav metaimei, but not for the reason that Rav Shimon Gamliel gave. What do you mean? Because the Elo Rav Shimon Gamliel gave a reason as what somebody holds masna mashikosa b'toida t'nai bottle. His reasoning is because you're trying to contract out of the Torah, you can't do that, and therefore your tanai, your conditions you put into place are irrelevant. That's what Rav Shimon Gamliel says. And the Rav disagrees, and Rav holds Tanoi Kaim. He holds in principle generally, you can in matters of money, you can walk away from it. So if you can walk away from it, so how come he rules like Rav Shimon Gamliel, but you still yashin your wife? For another reason, because somebody holds Yerushas habal d'Rabbanan. He holds that a husband inheriting his wife is Rabbanan. And the novel thing is the Chachamim asu chizu divreim yoisim mishal Torah. The Rav holds that if it would have been from the Torah, you can contract out of it. But now that it's only midrabanan, because the word she'er in the Torah does not mean your wife at all, just mean a relative. Now that it's only midrabanan that husband yashes his wife, the Chachamim felt that their laws need to be reinforced even beyond what the Torah is. And even though you could contract out of the Torah, we're not going to allow you to contract out of the Rabbanan. So since inheriting his wife in Rabbanan, he said, I don't want to, it means nothing. And therefore, your words went into the ether. And therefore, what? You can gash in your wife. Maybe that's so. He passes a little, but not for his reason. Says, you know what? It can't be. Why? Because we know for a fact that Rav is the Sover Rav Tanoi Kaim. So you want to say that Rav holds that you could contract out of the Torah, which means he disagrees with Gamliel. But that's not correct, as we're going to learn in Maramakis. But Itma, we learned, if somebody says to his friend, I'm selling you this object. We're going to learn Aina is if you cheat somebody. And if it's a sixth, if you cheated him by a sixth, then you have to reimburse them. If you cheated more than a sixth, then the whole deal, the whole transaction falls apart. But what happens? He says to his friend, I'm selling you this item on the condition that you have no rights under the laws of Aina. So you're trying to contract out of the Torah. And Rav says, Rav says, Yesh lo olav another. Tanai is worthless. In other words, you cannot contract yourself out of the Torah. Shmuel's the one that says, Shmuel says it's a valid tonight. But Rav says it's not. That means Rav agrees with Shimon Gamliel that you cannot go against the Torah. So what do you mean he paskel Hashem Gamliel, but not for the reason? For the very same reason. He agrees with him in principle. A husband cannot opt out of inheriting his wife, of inheriting his wife.
Is oina midorais or midorabanan?
Sorry?
Is oina midorais or midorabanan? Where does oina come from? Where does the halacha of oina come from?
I know it's in the Torah. We just had it in the Bechukaysa. We had it in the law in Bechukaysa.
Okay.
Halacha Kirab Shimon ben Gamliel. This is what it is. The halacha Rav Shimon Gamliel the Amaru says. Now we're trying to explain Rab very differently. Till now, we thought when you said the halacha Rav Shimon Gamliel was referring to that the husband cannot opt out of inheriting his wife, and he can always change his mind and inherit his wife. That's what we thought. And now we're saying, no, stop shalom. He agrees in principle with what Rav Shimon Gamliel said, that you cannot contract out against the Torah, like we just proved. But regarding the husband and the wife, you say that the husband therefore cannot opt out of inheriting his wife. I'm going to disagree, and I'm going to say a husband could opt out from inheriting his wife because you can go against the Torah. You could opt out. And why is that? Because I hold, as we'll see in a minute, that I agree with Rav Shimon Gamliel that you cannot contract out of the Torah. But what did Rab mean when he said, but I don't agree with his reasoning? The Ilu Rav Shimon ben Gamliel holds Mesa Yeshana. Rav Shimon ben Gamliel holds that if she dies, he will yashin her. And the Rab holds Mesa Lo Yeshana. The Rab holds he will not yashin her. And why not? Why won't he yashin her? Because he holds Yerusha Habal is only midrabbanan. And when it comes to the Rabbanan, the Tanai does remain in existence. When do we say that Tanai is annulled? Only if it's against the Torah. But it's against the Rabbanan, the Tanai remains in existence. So therefore, I disagree with Rav Shimon ben Gamliel when it comes to this thing about the husband yashing the wife. But I will agree with Shimon ben Gamliel that you cannot contract out against the Torah. Says the Gemara, as beautiful as that is, it doesn't fit into the words at all. Because what did he say? He said, I agree with his halacha, but I don't agree with his reasoning. What you just told me is exactly the opposite. I don't agree with his halacha about a husband yashing a wife, but I do agree with his reasoning about a Tanai. He cannot go against a Torah. So the wording is correct. It's incorrect. If so, if what I asked, hi mid-time ever like Yichasu, then he should have said the other way around. I disagree. I disagree with his what do you call it? With his halacha, not with his reason. Ella, the Gemara goes back. Halacha Kirab Shimon Gamliel. Going back, halacha means regarding the husband yashes the wife. So he said, I agree with Shimon Gamliel that the husband can yash the wife. The Omri says, Imesa, if the wife dies, Yershana, he will inherit her. I agree with that law, that he can change his mind tomorrow and inherit again. But not for his reason. What do you mean? The Ilur of Shimon Gamliel, in other words, in fact, I agree with his reason also. The reason is because you cannot contract out of the Torah. But Rav Shimon Gamliel limits that only to dinim of the Torah, that you cannot, contract out of it. I'm going to go a step further, and I'm going to say that even dinim d'Rabbanan, you cannot contract out. So I don't agree wholly with his reasoning, but the halacha definitely is like him. That if it's a din of the Torah, then you cannot contract out your Tanai's bottle. But if it's a din of the Rabbanan Tanai Kayim, you could contract out. But I hold, I feel about the Rabbanan Tanai bottle, that even I agree with him that this case that the husband and the wife maybe is Mahatorah. Everything he says is correct. I'm just in principle, generally, I disagree because I hold that even the Rabbanans, you cannot contract out. Says the Gemara, and then basically he's agreeing with Shimon Gamliel. All he's doing is adding another layer. But that's not what he said. If so, he agrees with his reason, he agrees with his halach. He just has a general dispute about something totally different, how far we take it. But Rav Moshe, all he's doing is adding another layer. Ella halacha Rav Shimon Gamliel. So Gemara finally concludes. This is what he meant. The halacha Shimon Gamliel that a husband cannot opt out of yashing his wife, and if he changes his mind, he can just yash her back. The Amar say Mezi Shana, but the lav metame, not for his reason. What do you mean? The Rav Shimon Gamliel, he holds Yerusha's about the rice. He holds a husband yashing the wife is not toilet, and therefore you cannot opt out of it, and that's why you can always change your mind. And if you go against a Torah, your Tanai is nullified. But the Rav holds Yerusha's habal is d'Rabbanan. He says the Yerusha of a husband is only midrabbanan. So the chayil is only midrabbanan, you should be able to opt out of it. So how can we say that the husband can still inherit his wife? Chachamim asu chizuk v'davreim kishol Torah. Not like before we said that the Rabbanan are stronger than the Torah. We're saying now that the Rabbanan are equal to the Torah. Since you cannot opt out of the Torah, nor can you opt out of the Rabbanan, and that's why the husband, if he says, I don't want a Yasha, it doesn't mean anything, and he can always change his mind. Says the Gemara, you're telling me, we'll go to the Mishnah so that tomorrow you person can start from the Mishnah. It's a new subject. Otherwise, it'll be difficult to get right in the middle. Rav Sava. Rav hold. When I ask a question, so you're telling me Rav hold that Yerushas Habal Rabbanan, the husband inherits his wife is merely Rabbanan. But Tanan, we learned in a Mishnah in Chaydos. Rabbi Yechon says, Hayoidish is Ishtar. He says if somebody inherits his wife, Yachzir, he's talking about inheriting, like we'll see in a cemetery. So he says if you inherit from your wife, comes Yovel, Yachzir Libnei Mishpacha, you should return it. Comes Yovel, give the family the plots in this area back to her family. The Yanaka Lemon Adamim, just charge them whatever it is, and they'll deduct it. We're trying to understand. Now, Micah said, what do we hold? So there's two things there. First, you have to give it back. Now, Yovel, when you give back a property, you cannot charge them money for it. You have to give it back to them because it belongs to them. So here we have this like a little conundrum. On the one hand, we say give the property back to her family, but then we say charge them for it, which means it's not really their property, it's yours. So what's going on here? So Micah said, what's going on here? If you hold your about the eyes of the Torah, and my accent, why give it back? Either Rabbanan, it's on your Rabbanan, dummy my Viritaya. How can he charge them money? What's going on here? Says the Gemara, Amar Rav, and Rav said, so Rav explained, La Oilam Kesavad, Yerushas Habal the rice, and we hold that a Yerusha of a husband is Mahatoida, and therefore he doesn't have to give back to Yehovah anything. But what are we talking about? We're talking about a unique case here. What did she leave behind? The family plot, the plots. And therefore, the Rabbanan stepped in and intervened and said, you know what? Which we had the idea before as well. It's an insult to the family that strangers will be buried next to the family. It's a family cemetery. And therefore, the Rabbanan said, even though it's yours, we're forcing you to give it back to them. But on the other hand, you don't have to give it back to them. So you have a right to charge them money. Omar Rabbanan Lishkul Dami, to charge them money, and return to them the property. So the Gemara then says, so then what do you mean deduct the money? It sounds like you're not really charging them full price. It's just some kind of a discount or something. Now, if the property belongs to the husband, then we're just intervening and saying you got to get back to them because it's not it's not appropriate. So why can't you charge full price? Says the Gemara, what it means is if his wife has a plot there, and he has to pay, the husband has to pay for that plot, so he deducts the value of his wife's plot from the overall charge of that property. So the property might be $1,000, his wife's plot is $100, he deducts $100 from that total sum. Like we actually learned, somebody sells a plot with that a kivra or the road to the plot to the grave. Ma'amada, they used to have a platform where they used to make the eulogies from, they used to cry from, where they used to make the eulogies from, is come along the family and they can force it to give it back to them or sell back to them because of Pagam Mishpacha. So what do we see from here? It's insulting to have all these strangers there. But what do we see from here? That Rav himself said that the property belongs 100% to the husband. So we see that that Yerushas Habal is Mahatayra. That belongs to the husband. And therefore Rav has to say he sells the property back to the family. So what do you tell me Rav holds that Yerushas Habal is on your abundance? It seems to me that clearly it's Mahatayra. Says the Gemara, Rav L'Tai made Rabbi Yechim Breika comment. He was just explaining the view of Rabbi Yechim Breika, that Rabbi Yechim Breika holds that inheritance is Mahat Torah, and therefore you're selling it back to the family. But he personally doesn't hold that. He holds that it's only Midrabbanan. Okay, that concludes today's Gemara. We'll see you.
What time's service tomorrow? What
7
time?
o'clock. 7 o'clock tomorrow morning. 7 o'clock.
Oh, it's gone.